That's it. I've got it. Brilliant. Right. So welcome everyone. So the webinar today is project performance metrics and how do you measure them. I'm being supported today by Miguel Tomico, so one of our senior consultants who will actually give a demonstration of some of the points that I will be covering during the presentation. So good morning, Miguel.
Good morning, everybody.
So with that, we'll go on and look at the agenda for the session. I can just, there you go. So a brief discussion about who Visure are, and to emphasize our absolute focus on requirements management. And then I'll go into a little discussion about what are project performance metrics and how could they add value to project managers in the context of requirements fulfillment. And then also talk about keeping the stakeholders informed and using requirements management as a vehicle to make sure that you only give the stakeholders, the primary stakeholders, the information they need to make informed decisions. Then we look at project performance in the context of requirements fulfillment. And before the demonstration, we'll look at real-time project reporting, and that once you've captured the information in a requirements database, how you can actually have real-time reporting on project performance and fulfillment. At that point, Miguel will do a demonstration of the points we've raised, and at the end, we'll do a small conclusion and then open it up to questions from your side. So a little bit about Visure. As I said at the beginning, we absolutely specialize in requirements engineering for systems engineering and the development of complex IT systems. The company was actually founded in 2007 with the delivery of innovative requirements solutions. So we're the manufacturer and distributor of Visure requirements, a leading requirement solution. And we're based in Madrid in Spain with a secondary headquarters now in the USA. I'm actually based in the UK, and we've got facilities in Sweden and Germany as well. One other thing on this slide there, we are ISO SPICE certified, and that's because of our involvement with the German automotive industry. And so we've got a certification for ISO SPICE. And then finally, we're a big supporter of IREB, which is the International Requirements Engineering Board for certification of requirement engineers. So we're a big sponsor and supporter of that initiative. So what are project performance metrics? Well, I'll let you have a brief read of the little cartoon there, Dilbert. And of course, this isn't relevant to any of us in planning our new project, but I thought it was a good start. So let's look first of all at the dictionary definition of project performance metrics. So managing project performance metrics via requirements. So project metrics can measure processes, activities, resources, processes and deliverables within a quality control plan. What is important here, though, is the centralization or centralized management of project requirements, which also in this case includes identifying and prioritizing, authorizing, managing and controlling projects and programs with other related work to achieve specific strategic business objectives. And go along with that, and I'll talk a little bit more about stakeholders and how we actually can identify those objectives in terms of stakeholder inputs. And I'll describe a little bit more about what we mean by stakeholders. One thing that's important in this process, though, we need to avoid scope creep. during the project, and to ensure that all variation, and that's very important. It's very often too easy when you've got a customer that says, I want to change this requirement, or I want to add some gold plating on something. It's very easy very often to just say yes, because obviously we want to satisfy what our customers are looking for. But once you start to control this information, you can always then look at the impact, or understand the impact of saying yes before you say yes. Understand the impact of, if you make that change to that stakeholder requirement, what is the impact on the project, both in terms of time and cost. And that's very important. So avoid scope creep, but where you get scope creep, ensure that you understand the implications of that scope creep, and also understand the implications in terms of cost, time, and resource to meet that additional requirement or improved requirement. So meeting requirements is one of the key success factors for project management. The project has to deliver on a range of stakeholder needs, from customers, shareholders, and its employees. Employees, it could be driven by a new marketing initiative, for instance. And ultimately, projects must focus on performance against customer requirements and the associated value. And finally, in project management, performance metrics are used to continuously assess the health of the project through the measurement of scope, quality, risks, time, costs, and actions associated with those things. So we have to be able to measure this information, ideally in real time, and this is where the ability to capture the project requirements and link those project requirements together, I regard it as a bit like a cobweb, where you've got little links between requirement statements, not at document level, but at individual statement level across the documents that are often produced during the progress of a project lifecycle. So the next thing, and this is quite an interesting area, is keeping KPI stakeholders informed. So, keeping your stakeholders who've got their own key performance indicators that they're measured by, keeping them informed of progress. But this came out of the points I made on this slide in a minute. They came out of a project management conference that I went to last year, actually, and it was really interesting to understand from the perspective of a project manager how they run, or how they run projects, and how they keep the stakeholders happy. So first of all, the project manager said, you've got to understand the stakeholders, the primary stakeholders' key performance indicators. So you need to understand from the, when I talk about stakeholders, let me explain that a bit. Now, one stakeholder clearly is your customer. I mean, that's probably very often one of your most important stakeholders. But there are many other stakeholders that you have to satisfy from a project management perspective through the life of a project. So, for instance, other stakeholders are your own company accountants, because you've got to run the project within given financial constraints, and have you got the right number of staff attending, involved in the project, and what is the associated costs of those resources throughout the project. Other stakeholders could be your marketing department. Other stakeholders could be people or regulatory authorities that impose standards on you, and that's particularly relevant in the pharmaceutical and medical devices industries, for instance. So stakeholders can involve many different people, and what is important is that you communicate with those stakeholders in the language which is relevant to their interests, their objectives, and their KPIs. Limit project progress and metrics communications to the stakeholders, to their KPIs. Now this is another one. This was quite interesting for me. It is important with your primary stakeholders that you only provide them with the information they require against their objectives and their key performance indicators. Don't bombard them with information which is not relevant to their KPIs and their objectives, because you will lose their interest. So it is important that you communicate to them with information which is relevant, on which, I guess, they can then make informed decisions. So limit project progress and metrics communications to the stakeholders and their area of interest only. Avoid sharing project data which is not relevant to the primary stakeholders, because if you start to give them too much information, and allow them to try and work out what I term the wood for the trees, then they will start to lose interest. And when something which is relevant to their decision making, when that comes through to them, they actually may miss it, because in fact they've been given information that they're not interested in too often, and then they start to lose sight of the bits they are interested in. So it is important we try and limit what we share with the stakeholders, the information which is relevant to them and their KPIs. To ensure the active participation and commitment of the primary stakeholders, it is important to only share the data which is relevant to their objectives and KPI measures. Failure to filter out irrelevant information threatens stakeholder support to the project and a successful conclusion to that project. And this information, for me at the time, it seemed obvious, but in a way it needed to be spelt out to me, just to reinforce the fact that we must be careful what information we share with who. Ensure that the language and the data is tailored to the perspective of each stakeholder in the context of their given interest, and that also for me was an important input, that we only communicate in the language. I mean, if you're talking to the person responsible for the financial control of your project, then clearly they've got a certain type of information they're interested in. They're less interested in the customer's requirements. They are interested in the resources that the project is consuming and the cost of those resources, etc. And stakeholders only need the information they require to make informed decisions, to make their contribution to the project as and when they are required to do so. And that's why it's important that we give them information relevant to their KPIs and their areas of interest. So, stabilizing requirements at the beginning of the project. This is the concept of trying to avoid building your property on sand, because obviously it's going to move. So establishing a key set of requirements at the beginning of the project is vitally important. And it's quite interesting. From my own history, I had an example where in the UK there was a project many years ago called Taurus, and it was the attempted automation of the UK stock exchange. And the project actually was cancelled on its first round, having at that point spent just over £70 million. And the project manager said it was the easiest decision he ever had to make to cancel that project at the time. And the reason he cancelled it is when they started the project, they had 17 interested stakeholders, and at the beginning they captured 3% of the requirements. But at that point they went out and they bought a server, they started cutting code when only 3% of the requirements had been identified or defined across the 17 interested stakeholders or interested parties. Clearly the project was going to fail because they discovered that with only 3% of the requirements defined, then it was, they were cutting code on something that hadn't been bottomed out. So for me, unstable stakeholder requirements equals planning for project failure. And there was some analysis done. I know it was done a little while ago now, but this is a particularly interesting graph for me. So the present example was 3% of the requirements identified at the beginning. It meant that the requirements at the analysis design phase took longer. The development phase took longer because we kept on having to go back and change some of the software that had been developed, or some of the system components that had been developed. They had to be changed because the analysis and design hadn't been completed. And then deployment then also took longer. If you look at the second line down, leading practice said, actually at the beginning of the project we invest more time in understanding the stakeholder requirements, understanding the KPIs, understanding how the stakeholders are measured, understanding their area of interest and their objectives out of the project. So let's take longer over that process. It's a difficult decision for a project manager because very often this is a time when this is pure cost to the organization. But in making more time at the beginning to properly understand the requirements, document those requirements, it's starting to build your property on concrete rather than sand. It means that the analysis and design part of the life cycle becomes shorter because that is done as part of bottoming out and making those initial requirements solid. It also means the development phase is shortened because you're having to do less reiteration or less changes to requirements which are still being established. And finally, the deployment phase, there notice is reduced from 15% of the time down to 5% of the time, which gives us an opportunity to actually save time at the end of the project. So with good governance system and the good foundation of agreed requirements, projects really can deliver within time and on budget, but we do have to make that investment up front. So you see a productivity improvement of up to 25% and capital improvement of up to 70%. And this was real statistics actually developed from the US Air Force on a report they produced. So linking information at statement level is vitally important to support this process. So we need to change, if we need to change one system requirement, that in the past that document would effectively stand alone. Well, the reality is across a project lifecycle that is not the case. That requirement will link to system tests. So what is the impact on system tests if that one system requirement should change? And this one is where it gets even more interesting. So if we change that one system requirement, are we still compliant with the stakeholders' original needs? So here we've got the various documents documenting our stakeholder KPIs, our customer requirements, our business rules, whatever contribution we start with. These are very often in separate documents. We do need to somehow wire this information together so we can actually start to do this type of impact analysis. And notice now, so if our system requirement changes, what impact has it had on our stakeholder KPIs? Are we still compliant? In turn, what impact does that change potentially have on the verification criteria for that customer or stakeholder verification information? Going down the V curve here, that one system specification change, what is the impact on our subsystem requirements, the electrical, the mechanical, or what other project documents we need to support? What will be the impact on our subsystem tests? Are they still valid? So these are, so you notice here, one requirement change in this project has touched lots of other requirements in lots of other documents which fulfill the project's requirements. So what is touched by this request for change? And this is another one where we can start to see where project metrics, we can start to look at completeness. So here we've got an original document. This could be the stakeholder document, it could be the user requirements document, or your customer requirements, or your marketing requirements. Whichever it is, what we need to draw out is what are requirements in this information and what do we need to achieve out of this project. Well, here we've got this idea of explicit traceability. You don't need to actually read the, you don't need to actually read the actual statements. This is just an example of a document. And we've got individual statements, and we've now created explicit links from the, in this case, the user requirements, the user interface requirements, to how we're going to fulfill those user interface requirements in our system design. But notice I've only got explicit linking to a small number. What is really important is ultimately every single one of those requirements has to be satisfied as part of this project. And what we have to do as part of the project is ensure that all those blank boxes you can now see are actually filled with data on how we are going to fulfill, how we are going to satisfy those user interface requirements in this case. Very simple, and the first metric we're looking at here is from this very simple analysis. I know it's very crude, but it's very important for a project manager to understand that 35% of the user requirements link to system requirements, which means that 65%, there is still 65% of work still to be done. Now this is a very useful metrics for a project manager to get some idea of the progress we are at in this project. And what we've got to do is now part of this project obviously is to start to fill out those boxes, start to complete how we're going to satisfy those user requirements. So let's look at some of the business challenges associated with that we get through starting to build this idea of traceability at the project management level. So how does one stakeholder change in one specification impact one or many requirements in the other associated documents that are used through the project? Well, by the way, I've got to say here, this is a two-way street. So if one stakeholder requirement should change, then what impact is that going to have on my system design? What impact is that going to have on my testing and verification? Likewise, if something changes in our system design, are we still compliant with what the stakeholders, what the customer originally asked for? These are really important questions, but we have to be able to answer them in a microscopic way at individual requirement statement level, not at document level. What is the impact of this from a business impact perspective? The impact of change will result very often in retrospective rework. That's part of that. Do you remember that 55% of implementation? That's retrospective rework, where we have to go back and redesign and redo things that we'd already done once, which causes project delays, and in turn, you know, the old adage, time is money, which then adds cost to our project. So what is the cost to the project when the full impact of requirements change is not quickly identified? Well, ideally, we need to understand the impact of change in real time, and we need to understand that change before we make the change. So we can actually see what is touched if we make that change. And we can only see what is touched is if this information is linked together throughout the myriad of documents that support the project lifecycle. So business impact, working on out-of-date information resulting, again, in expensive rework, project overruns, and again, increased costs. So risk management, I love the graphic on this, the dart player throwing darts into the ball with a blindfold on, or throwing a dice. So risks can be motivated by requirements from any part of the project and any one of the project documents. Linking risks and risk mitigation information should be an integral part of the project management process, which should be centralized and visible to all, so that we can actually start to see and expose potential risks and start to think about how we're going to mitigate against those risks. And that should also be traced as part of our project documentation. So how do we maintain explicit compliance to standards and legislation and regulatory constraints? Well, again, you know, very often you'll get a glib reference to a standard you need to comply with. When you actually look into that standard, though, only maybe 10 or 20% of that actual standard is relevant to this instance of this project. What we mustn't try and do is comply with everything, particularly comply with the whole standard where some of the standard is not relevant to this instance of this project. Because don't forget, standards and regulations try to be all things to all people. So we need to take out of those standards documents, draw out the standards which are relevant to this instance of this project, and make those individual requirements out of that standard additional requirements that we need to comply with. But what is important here is we need to take away requirements in that standard which are not relevant to this project and therefore take them out. Don't try and add the gold plating where it's not necessary. Business impact, if we don't do this, is retrospective rework, penalties for not complying with particular standards, and associated fines for non-compliance, particularly if you're working in government-type contracts. So finally, once you start to build this spider's web of information connectivity, where information is connected in the project at statement level, you get many other very positive byproducts that support the idea of real-time project reporting. So by capturing and linking project requirements, the ability to track fulfillment of requirements and progress in real time becomes a reality. Linking stakeholder objectives to project delivery artifacts empowers project managers to supply the stakeholders with precisely the data they need to address their KPIs so that they can make informed decisions, and they're basing that on information which is relevant to them, and they don't want to see a myriad of information which is not relevant to them. Sorry, and finally, my couple of final slides. So the importance of process and collaboration. So to support this idea of wiring information or linking information together across the project, we have to apply a process. You have to have what we call a block diagram or schema of how the documents are linked together, and everyone in the project needs to understand that. So they're working on one document in this project. They need to understand the context of that document in amongst the other documents that are being worked on within the project. And of course with this comes collaboration, centralizing this information into one place and linking this information. And when you start to link the information, the real benefits of looking at the impact of one requirement change on other documents, other parts of the project become a reality, and you can look at implications in real time rather than have to rely on those canteen discussions, as I call them, where you discover something which is not documented, and you know it changes the job you've got to do. And then out of the bottom of this, if you get the process right and you build this collaborative environment for sharing requirements information across your product quality improves as a byproduct of achieving these objectives. So real-time project reporting is you're capturing the information, you're analyzing that information in a collaborative way, you're building specifications to support your project objectives, and out of that you're actually supporting your validation, verification, and testing to ensure that you are delivering what you originally set out to deliver against your stakeholder KPIs and your stakeholder objectives. And before I hand over to Miguel for the demonstration, this is an example of what we call a block diagram, but it's actually your view of your process and your view of how information is linked together. So your stakeholder requirements or your customer requirements are derived from your stakeholders, and I've already explained who they may be. They're derived from standards, which could be an external project, and they're derived from your customer requirements. Your stakeholder requirements, of course, have to be validated by acceptance tests to ensure that they are satisfying what you originally set out to do. They are satisfied by system requirements, which are validated by their own system tests. They are satisfied by your subsystem requirements, which are validated by your subsystem tests. Notice at the left-hand side of the screen here, your risk register your risk register, they can actually link to any requirement in any of these documents. In this example, we're just showing we've got them motivated by requirements in your stakeholders and your system requirements. And it's important that everybody has view of this information at any time. And once you've got the information captured in this way, the ability to produce the project metrics I've talked about, how complete, how much have we satisfied those stakeholder requirements, how many of them link to acceptance tests, then it gives you a real view of how you can actually produce metrics to support this information. At this point, I'm going to hand across to Miguel, who will actually show how we can actually achieve some of what I've talked about inside a tool, how a requirements tool can actually help achieve your ability to deal with project metrics in real time. So Miguel, over to you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Paul. That was a very informative demonstration. Okay, so what we will demonstrate now is, as you said, there's some examples of how a tool can assist to generate useful metrics of the project in a real environment. It will take me less than 20 minutes, about 12 minutes or so. Okay, so now that we are using a requirements management tool, okay, it serves us as a centralized repository where we can gather and collect requirements and test specifications from the different stakeholders. And well, we all know the effort required by engineers and quality managers to write all these specifications, fill their attributes, and establish the corresponding relationships between the different artifacts. Therefore, once the information is in the database, under change management control, we should get the best out of it by generating metrics and reports. This is one of the biggest benefits of using a tool. We can generate real-time reports at any time. For example, one of the key performance indicators for my customer may be to measure the progress or completeness of the project in terms of the status of every stakeholder requirement. So we will track the status of, as you can see here, the status of all high-level stakeholder requirements, independently if they come from users, customers, regulations, or marketing. Okay. And as you can see, we have used an enumerated value. It has a workflow assigned to it so that the project manager, the system engineers, the change control board, and anyone involved has been reviewed and approving these requirements. Now that we have collected all this data of the progress, we can analyze it and generate real-time metrics and reports. We can do it right in the tool by making use of views and filters. So we'll select the stakeholder requirements filter, can display all attributes like in a spreadsheet, like in Microsoft Excel, or even better, to display a classification by attribute, selecting the status, so that I can quickly see how many stakeholder requirements are in ready for review status, how many are in more info needed status, how many are reviewed, approved, etc. And if we select a second attribute here, sorry, the priority, I can quickly see that for the 8 requirements ready for review, 4 of them have high priority, 1 has medium priority, another 3 have low priority, etc. So as you can see, it's a quick way to display some basic but useful metrics. Or what we can also do is to design and generate any kind of custom report. Let me export the requirement status report. So using our reporting engine, we can display results of functions and calculations or even graphs. These reports can include the customer logo, title page, header and footers, etc. Any kind of formatting and content. The idea is that we can filter and display data based on attributes, versions of, or relationships. Let me select the stakeholder requirements here. I could run this analysis for all stakeholder requirements or for only the ones that are relevant for the stakeholder A, for customer requirements, etc. Let's just run it for all my stakeholder requirements. Well, what we are now displaying is a preview of a progress report based on that status attribute of all stakeholder requirements. We can represent the calculations, as you can see, in a tabular format, as a pie chart, a bar chart, etc. It's very powerful. I will say that almost any kind of report that I can think of can be generated. Well, these reports can be shared with customers or other stakeholders by saving them as documents, PDF documents, Microsoft Word documents, etc., so that we can send them later via email. Okay, so the idea is that I can generate the report with the corporate format, including my corporate logo, etc. So these reports are ready to be sent to customers or suppliers. What we can also do is to export these reports to HTML and publish them in a web server so that everybody can access to these reports and dashboards through the internet. We may also be interested in generating the report in batch mode so that it is generated automatically during the night. Okay, good. But as Paul mentioned, we have to be careful when publishing and sharing this information with stakeholders. We must limit the communications with them to data relevant to their KPIs. We have to use the same perspective or same language. So let's assume that in this case, in order to demonstrate compliance with those stakeholder requirements, consulting a status attribute is not enough. We need to analyze. Let me go back to the diagram. We need to analyze these satisfied by relationships so that we are sure that we are implementing all those requirements in cascade from the high-level stakeholder requirements to the system specification and the subsystem specification, along with the test cases. We will run a test coverage analysis to make sure that at least there is one test case associated with each requirement and it has passed. Okay, so in order to do this kind of traceability impact analysis, we can display a view right in the tool like this one. This one is using the test management capabilities, within Visure requirements. So this is displaying the relationships like in a tree. It is displaying the satisfied by relationships here. So this will be the stakeholder requirements along with the system requirements and the subsystem requirements, which in this case are mechanical requirements. We are also displaying the last result of the associated test case. So I can see in one single view all the related information. So if I'm going to modify one of these stakeholder requirements, I can see the full impact in terms of the detailed system and subsystem requirements and the corresponding test cases. But well, again, we can generate a custom report like the one we have here, the requirements covered by tests. So I can display with some numbers, like the 35 that Paul showed before with requirement satisfaction. Well, in this case, for requirements coverage to test cases is the 85%. I have 20 requirements, but 3 of them are still not traced to any test case. I'll have to justify that. Good. So, as we can see, generating metrics and reports come with benefits for everybody. But not only for customers and stakeholders, but also for suppliers and the development team. Now that our requirements management tool stores all modifications made to the requirement, let me go back to the view, so that we get in the tool in the versions tab, we have all the information of each modification. This is who requested the change, when did it, and what was actually changed. So we have access to all the information of each version. So, for example, I may want to compare two baselines to check the changes made in that interval of time. This is how many requirements have been modified, how many requirements are new, etc. So let me select here the initial one, or the 1.0, with the current one. So I can run an out-of-the-box report to check the requirements that have been modified, the ones that are new, the ones that have been deleted, etc. And I should be able to see the individual changes, if possible, in a similar way as the Microsoft Word track changes, because this will quickly allow us to identify the individual changes. Good. For instance, we could generate or what's new for the new version of the software out of these kind of reports. But okay, that's fine. But what is even more important is to keep all these changes under control, so that we avoid unnecessary retrospective rework. Let me display a report here. This is a volatility report, or a stability report. This is displaying the number of versions of the requirements. This is the number of modifications made to them. I can see that the average of versions, this is modifications per requirement, is 3.5. Well, I will say that it's a bit high. Ideally, we have to keep this volatility to a minimum. So, well, this way we can monitor the changes, and we should be able to avoid, or at least minimize, the scope creep by generating this kind of volatility reports and presenting them to the customer or the management to justify why the amount of work is going up, even if they haven't requested anything new, because they are requesting changes all the time. Obviously, the tool cannot reduce the number of changes that your customer will ask for, but it's good that you can generate this kind of reports, at least to justify the amount of work, the number of impacted artifacts when they request a change, etc. Okay, so it's really important to keep changes under control and avoid unnecessary retrospective rework. So that's it. We have seen just a couple of examples. There are obviously many other metrics or reports that can be useful, but what is important is to make use of these tools to generate metrics and reports and share them with all stakeholders. It's the only way to measure and monitor status and completeness, and demonstrate compliance with stakeholders, and keep changes under control, among other benefits. All of these benefits are key to business success. So that's it. I will hand over to Paul again. Paul, Great. Thanks a lot.
Lovely, thank you, Miguel. No, that was excellent. Obviously showing the real-time reporting, which can be gained through building this traceability. Right, just if I can get that. Trying to get control of the demonstrate the material again. It's taking its time, unfortunately.
Yep, you got it. So this is the business challenges of requirements change.
Okay, I think it's happening. No, can you get? Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, got it. Sorry about this. I've just gone on.
It takes some time.
Yeah, there's a bit of a delay. All right, go to that.
Let's see the conclusions.
It's happening now, yeah. Right, so as we pointed out at the beginning, go back. Yeah, it does take a bit of time. There's a bit of time lag there, so hopefully it will come through.
We're going to go through the conclusions, right?
That one. Yes, there you go.
Okay.
That's what I wanted. Right. So as we mentioned before, so we look at the impact of one change to one statement in one document, and the impact to the change or what is touched by that change in the other documents. And the fact that we can actually produce real-time metrics reporting against this information is very important to successfully running that project and achieving your customer requirements and your stakeholder requirements against their key performance indicators. So in conclusion, it allows projects to monitor status and completeness in real time, ensures absolute clarity of understanding between all contractual parties. It gives you the ability to demonstrate compliance with stakeholder requirements and makes it easier to secure payment or against any of your contractual milestones. It's also important that we limit communications with key stakeholders with the data relevant to their KPIs, to their objectives out of the project. Ensures contractual commitments are appropriately addressed while minimizing risk and ensures compliance with specified requirements. But it also ensures that these key stakeholders have got the information they need to make informed decisions on the projects based on the way that they personally also measured. And it also allows you to analyze the impact of change, increases the commercial opportunities, decreases the risk associated with change, and ensures that where change occurs, then we understand fully the impact of that change both in terms of cost, time, and resource. It avoids the need for unnecessary retrospective rework and in the worst case scenarios, particularly in the automotive industry, product recalls. So with that, that's our presentation, that's our webinar today. Thank you all for your attending the session. I hope you got good value out of it. If you want to raise any questions now through the chat window, please feel free to do so.